Yeah. Yes. Yes, we're back. It's true. Yes, it is. Hey, everybody. My name is Joey B. This is Knowledge This Degree here on the Blind Knowledge Network. We are so excited to be back with you on this edition of Behind the Content, where I go behind the content creator. Basically, and we all see their content, we all hear it, whether it's a podcast, digital content creation, or even a live stream. But who are these people? What makes them tick, man? What makes them want to keep doing this, and what made them want to do it in the first place? So that's what the deal is on Behind the Content. Just a little plug before we get started with Matt Bliss from Teaching CultureCast. Blindknowledge.com is a spot where you can see all of our content, ourselves actually, all of our content creators, digital live streamers. The site itself, blindknowledge.com, will be live very shortly. Just keep hitting that refresh button, and eventually it will come upon this live status. I promise you, it'll happen eventually. So keep in mind, blindknowledge.com. Hopefully it will be live right now for you. And we're also on social media all over the place. Instagram is The Blind Knowledge. We're on Twitter at blind_knowledge. We are on TikTok. We are on Twitch at The Blind Knowledge. And we are on Facebook for anyone who is still on there at Blind Knowledge. So I think that's enough from me because I can promote all day, as we know. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and bring on Matt Bliss, because this man knows a thing or two about podcasting. He knows a thing or two about games, and he has an exquisite beard that I would never be able to grow myself. So thank you, Matt, and welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on. And thanks for the compliment about the beard. It's uncommon. I'm not on video as often when you're podcasting, so it's really nice to get a compliment like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's quite a few ladies that are into the beard, so keep doing your thing, Matt, I guess.
Well, there's only one lady that I care about, and that's the wife.
That's smart man. Well, Matt, thanks for coming on. Appreciate your time and everything. Basically, this is, of course, Knowledge This Degree. We're doing the Behind the Content series. And we're going to basically get behind Matt Bliss, the artist, the creator, the man, the myth, the legend himself. Now, you are stationed, or not stationed, but you live over in Australia. Is that correct?
Yes. Not stationed. It is currently my home, has been for the last
not stationed
years
there,
or so.
Fair. You're not like in the armed guard, as we know. At
No.
least that we know of.
Yeah, but I am in Australia. Only
Cool.
Been abroad for about a year in London, and then came on back. And it's been here for a little while, and it's kind of interesting, I think, for podcasting niches to be from Australia. It's almost like a forbidden fruit, kind of like you don't get the Australian podcaster much in some spaces. So
yeah, there aren't a lot of you out there. I mean, I'm over here in the US, and podcasting is so huge in the US, and it's actually rather there's a lot of it. Basically, it's very saturated in the market. So it's nice to connect with podcasters and creators that aren't so much around this area. They're not really my neighbors. They're just in this whole different country, and in your case, on the other side of the world. So this is a beautiful thing. So Matt, you do a podcast called Teaching CultureCast. Can you give us a little rundown on what that is?
Absolutely. So the Teaching CultureCast is, it's primarily going to be a platform for teachers to seek professional development, learn a little bit more about teaching, find the edges of perhaps their practice, the pedagogy, the extra things in the background that maybe don't get addressed as often. Because in teaching, there are the basics that you definitely have to hit. There will be registration bodies that tell you need to do a certain amount of professional development, for example. And there's always the heavy hitters with what you can tackle with that PD as well. It's always going to be how you teach the lessons, your approach to the lessons and the methodology. But there's so much that isn't covered. And most podcasts tend to hit the experts as opposed to getting the people who are in the trenches, as it were, going with our stationed analogy from earlier. They're
Yes.
actually out there teaching. They are practicing things. They've got their own little tips and tricks, I guess, to actually approach teaching in a way that's sustainable and fills in the gaps. And with the Teaching Culture Cast, we're currently still in our first season. We're very close to wrapping that up and going into a bit of a break. And our big focus initially has been on graduate teachers and pre-service teachers, or people who are training to be teachers, because that's where those gaps are really present. It's
That makes sense.
uh,
Yeah.
yeah, that you undertake a master's course or a tertiary degree of some kind, and they have the subjects that they teach you about. But whether you get the stuff in between, the extra little things that can really help you along your way, really depends on the lecturer you get, or the tutor, or sometimes the institution itself. So that's the gap that we're trying to address with the Teaching Culture Cast at the moment. Really trying to give people what they need to get started in teaching really well, in addition to helping out currently practicing teachers with their practice and pedagogy. It's a lot of P's. There's lots of P's in teaching.
A lot of P's in there. Yeah.
Trying to hit a lot of P's. Yeah. So that's the Teaching Culture Cast at the moment.
Right on. Right on. Well, we have an alliteration of P's happening here. But it's very interesting. So you're filling in the gaps. You are putting this information out there so that educators that come on board are themselves educated on how they can become better through theories and through experiences. Do I have that right?
Probably more so the experiences. Like, there is no end to educational experts that I could approach to get on the podcast to talk about this theory or that theory. The experience, I think, lends the credibility to the podcast a lot more, because that's the stuff that you don't hear about. The teachers that don't really get a voice in the industry don't really want one sometimes as well. In fact, that's been one of the big things starting this podcast, that it's all well and good to have the idea for it, but getting this one rolling, I needed to have teachers who were willing to come onto the podcast and talk about their practice and talk about what they do. But a lot of them had a bit of imposter syndrome when I approached some that I knew already, because I am teacher trained. I've got my Masters of Teaching. So while I'm not currently a teacher, I could be. And I've had some friends as teachers and colleagues, ex-colleagues as teachers, that I could have approached as well. But many of them felt like they didn't have anything to offer. And it took a little bit of convincing to bring them into the room a little bit and start to talk about the things that they could offer. And it's amazing what teachers do have to offer the industry, the educational industry, as well as offering to everybody else. Because I'm not sure if you've been keeping up, Joey, but there's a lot of stuff going on in teaching currently with conditions and pandemic response. The amount of work that teachers have to accomplish, it's a lot. And
I can only imagine. Yeah, I can only imagine. I'm not a teacher myself, but we have spoken in the past about how the U.S. and they're kind of slacking on their education system, and yeah, now you have this whole pandemic that has come out, and it's got to have adjusted, just the ways and the modes that you teach.
That's it. And that's been one of the big struggles in Australia, who you may have seen as well, has, or at least the state that I'm currently in, has had the most lockdowns and the longest period of lockdowns.
Yes, you currently have the record of all lockdowns, most lockdowns. Yeah, we've heard all about it over here, but we only know what we hear, so we can only go off of that.
Yeah, about 275 days, I think, in total across 2 years it was. And the students and the teachers, obviously, that was ducking and diving between face-to-face teaching and doing it virtually. And it was always entirely virtually. There was very little room for adjustment there because of the nature of the lockdowns. So yeah, it's been a really interesting conversation. But funnily enough, in the latest episode, in episode 10, I had the opportunity to talk to an American teacher about the comparison between our experiences and what Australians hear about the US in teaching, as well as a little bit about what they hear about Australia as well. And if you're keen to hear the differences in the teaching style, his unique methodology, as well as some of those comparisons, then episode 10 would be a really good shout.
Fair enough.
Sorry, shameless promo. I'm not sure if that's what it's for.
As you should. This is what it's for, man. This is the spotlight. This is Knowledge This Degree podcast. I'm here with Matt Bliss of Teaching CultureCast. You can check out Teaching CultureCast on Apple, on Spotify. Where else can they find it? YouTube, maybe? No.
I believe the phrase is wherever you get your podcasts.
Wherever you get your podcast, check out Teaching CultureCast. It's Matt Bliss. He's in the house. Matt, what else do you do as far as podcasts go? Do you hop on other shows ever as a guest? Do you have anything else that you do besides the teaching?
Well, the podcasting for me has become a bit of a hobby. So I do jump around a little bit. Teaching is, I would say, is my primary one. The Teaching CultureCast is. It's where I test out a few, social media engagement techniques and see what I can get done. But you did mention the video games as one of the aspects of my podcasting as well. Yeah. There is one that I contribute to quite often called the Game & Watch podcast. They do a weekly podcast where we just talk about gaming news and more from the consumer perspective than anything else. They haven't tackled full industry in-depth stuff. They haven't got anyone on the show yet that's like completely in there as an influencer in that space, but it's very hard. Video games is a really big media content kind of behemoth.
Oh, it's huge, dude. It's huge. It's always been huge since the 80s. And now with Twitch and you have, you have gamers. I mean, back in the day, we used to just be people that played video games. That's who we were. And now it's a category of gamers. It's almost been accepted. It's kind of amazing. It is kind of oversaturated with the gaming world. You get a lot of podcasts out there that are definitely specifically geared towards gaming. But the show you go on, don't you guys talk about some cool things like how the games are built, the different chip styles, and even what these retro games sell for when they're graded? Do I have that right?
A little bit. So that's where our individual proclivities come into play, I guess. Where I'm more of the tech guy. If someone talks about a transport truck of graphics cards disappearing, I'll get an opportunity to extol the bad things about chip shortages in our current environment. We've got another host, Too Tall for You Fool, or Justin Reed, who's really into his retro games. So he'll often bring up the different consoles that are constantly coming out as Kickstarters or whatever it might be, and talking about the games that are available for those. And we've got our own little pockets, and that's cool. Kind of what makes the podcast great.
That's a beautiful thing. So you can go from different genres, different niches, and you still feel comfortable out there.
That's it. And funnily enough, it's a good platform for me to talk about. And now I'm by no means experienced in this space just yet, but NFTs and cryptocurrency and the blockchain is a very big subject in video games at the moment. Mostly because everybody's against it. NFTs are
interesting,
viewed as a scam in video games, and
I've heard that.
Majority of the time they are, and it seems like an opportunity for people not to listen to the gaming public and what they're trying to say. But there's something in there. I know that there's an end game that they're trying to get at. So I'm trying to keep the conversation going with it. I must admit, my co-hosts aren't as keen to talk about it, but I feel like we need to get the discourse rolling with it, just to make sure that there's both sides of the argument.
That's an interesting take. Yeah, maybe we should introduce you to Devon, who's doing a show on Blind Knowledge called Bridging the Gap, which is all about cryptocurrency, which is all about the history of cryptocurrency. Yeah, maybe we connect to that, maybe not. But let's get back into Matt Bliss. So happy to have him on. We cherish his time and his beard and his background. I love that color couch. I've commented on before. It's such a cool color.
Thank you.
Yeah, I haven't
It's
found a couch like that just yet.
no, well, look, I'm not going to admit that it's well, I am going to admit actually that it's a
Fair
very
enough.
cheap couch. When we have
Okay,
people over, we have to sleep on that thing, and I tell you, I'm worse off for it. So
that's
as long
funny.
as it looks pretty, it's doing something.
Hey, all right. Yeah, looks can go a little ways, especially when you're doing the live streaming thing.
That's
So
it.
what let's go backwards in your history. What made you get into podcasting in the first place?
Well, I think it'll be a common story among many people, but it was really the pandemic. For the work that I do, which is a bit of IT training, usually face to face, that pushed me into a realm from the physical space where I was telling people how to do things and teaching them to engaging them virtually because of lockdowns, because we had to be very cautious when the pandemic first started. And I've always been tangentially interested in how the technology works, how video game streaming works, and how some of these podcasts manage to put together something with so little. And the provision of the technology makes it actually very easy, even though it takes a little bit of time to get used to it. So I explored the tech a little bit, and then all of a sudden, I kind of said, hey, maybe podcasting is the go. I've also been told my voice is made for radio. They haven't talked about my face in that sense, so I'm guessing I'm not the ugliest person in the world. But
Yeah, there are some people that are just made for radio for sure.
yeah,
That's funny.
but yeah, people enjoyed listening to the training I delivered in the role that I currently have. So I figured transfer that to an audio medium and see where we can go. And I've had a few ideas. There's been the Lad Banter podcast, which is what every podcaster wants to do, just hang out with their mates and chat about whatever.
Yep,
But
that's
if you
one
want to
style.
be, yeah, but if it's a little bit hard to market, it's not attacking a niche. It's not necessarily going to have stable growth
Right.
unless you already have a following. Like there's a lot of things you have to consider, and you also have to consider your goals. Like, is it about
True.
just doing it for a cathartic experience with your friends, or is it about you marketing and creating one of those behemoths I talked about that really dominates a space and has success driven by listenership and marketing and ad revenue and things like that.
Hmm.
But I started with the hobbyist, and now I'm kind of leaning towards a bit more of the latter, trying to see how deep into the space I can get, and still testing out a few things here or there. But it was really the pandemic, availability of time, and being able to connect with people in a different way for me that pushed me towards podcasting.
Yeah, I think that is a common theme. Definitely with the pandemic, people have seemed to kind of figure out what they like to do, who they are, who they want to be in the future, what is work life going to be like, because you're so used to having this time in your house, in your home, wherever that may be. A lot of us are working online, working from home, where we all kind of realize that, wow, this is doable. This is definitely doable. There's no reason for me to sit in traffic for 2 hours. There's no reason to have to be uncomfortable in a cube with your manager over your, breathing on your neck, over your shoulder, or, even have to get dressed up and wear a suit or, even pants. You can just go pantless. Matt could be pantless right now. We don't know.
Could
We
be.
have no idea. But
And you were.
that's freedom. You have the freedom of no pants, basically. So that's on
Yep.
the positive end of it, obviously. But
That's the great thing about podcasting too. You can wear nothing,
yeah, that's true.
and they'll
Yeah,
never know.
actually, yes, you could be stroke nude. So you could definitely just be flying out there, basically,
Indeed.
podcasting. But yeah, it's interesting too. Podcasting has gone from this medium that was only audio, and now we have this video. integration basically and we can't seem to get the name right. We don't know if it's video podcasting or vodcasting, I've heard recently, which sounds so stupid.
Look,
Or
I think
vcasting. We haven't found that yet as a community.
there are the purists out there that will say video isn't a podcast. A podcast is audio, and if it has an RSS feed,
Yeah.
it's a podcast. But you're right; it's getting kind of diluted a little bit, and the term podcast refers to for some people a conversation between people that gets recorded and distributed and shared. Vodcast would make sense for people who use Twitch and store their podcasts for people to watch from there, as opposed to distributing it via audio. But yeah, there's everybody is a different type, and you'll find disagreement everywhere.
Oh yeah, agreement and disagreement, and too much disagreement. There should be a little more. Like, let's figure out where we have in common. Let's start there, and then branch out to disagreements. Yes,
well, I think
the most civil way to have discussion. I think
it's really interesting thinking about podcasting that way too, because when we say we've got a podcast, when you talk to someone who listens to podcasts about it, they think, oh, cool. So you're doing all the podcasts with these guys, all of these other podcasts in the world. But you are very much an island when you start your podcast, at least. And you haven't created relationships with other podcasts as well. And being in that island means that you have, it takes a bit of effort to connect with the community at large, but it means that you've got some luxuries too. And I think it's the authenticity, the genuineness of a podcast that really shows through in the content and the way it's delivered and the way that you engage the people who do listen. So it's as long as you accept yourselves as a podcast and the things that you do and the way that you approach it, I think that's all we can ask as a podcaster. I think as long as we know who we are.
You gotta stay true to yourself and your overall message and your vision, really. I've noticed that Twitter's the spot where there's kind of this community of podcasters that will like and follow each other, and then there's like these little groups of podcasters that kind of all know each other, and then you kind of branch out from there, and then there's Twitter Spaces, and of course Reddit is another great spot. In certain subreddits, certain ones are good. Shout out to the moderators out there, by the way.
Reddit moderators. I don't think anybody knows what Reddit moderators get put through.
I can only imagine. They don't get enough love, that's for sure.
But you're right about Twitter though, because I've recently tapped into that myself. Follow me at @BlissPod.
There he is right there. Twitter.
Shameless. Shameless. It's also a good tip for podcasters too. They call it shameless promotion because I think there's an element of modesty attached to podcasts as well. The trick is breaking that a little bit, just to make sure that you're not towing the line, but you're happy to talk about yourself in a way that makes people want to listen. But Twitter is definitely blasting out, especially for the podcaster community. Spaces are massive, especially since Clubhouse has kind of just gone into the toilet.
Good point.
And I think the next big market niche for podcasts is podcasters, because they are such a small niche audience in comparison to everyone else, and they are necessarily invested in podcasts. And I've seen and listened to a lot of really well-produced podcasts that are directed at other podcasters that are just like they're hitting the perfect stuff. Tanner Campbell is a really big one that I've started listening to. He's got great advice for anyone who's looking to start or has been doing it for a while and looking for those little tips. And he does very short form but direct podcasts, and he's got some credibility behind him. So maybe check him out on Twitter if anyone is keen to start.
Yeah, that's the good advice for anyone, especially starting out. What was his name again?
Tanner Campbell.
Tanner
Campbell.
Tanner
Sorry,
Campbell.
I
Check
feel
him
like I have
out.
to unpack the Australian sometimes.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. Whatever you got to do.
Yeah.
That's cool, though. Yeah, there are a lot of aspiring podcasters, of course. It seems like there's new
Yeah.
ones every day. You know, some people seem, they'll put one or two out, see if they like it or not, and then they inevitably quit. But it is
Yeah.
important to establish the community, learn from your community, network with your community, especially join us over at Blind Knowledge if you want to be part of a community. If you're experienced, give us a ring, 877-237-1143. Also, we are everywhere. So, or just tune into this and we can just figure it out from there. There's so many options. There's these podcast networks, and a lot of podcast networks, they get a bad rap. I'm trying to establish one that isn't like that, but there are some good ones out there. And of course, there's Good Pods. There's other places like that I can't think of right now. Like SoundCloud is on there. There's some good spots, but you got to distribute yourself. You got to be out there, both content wise. Maybe you go with video, just to have some snippets out there to get people over to your audio, or the list goes deep. But you got to start somewhere, right, Matt?
Absolutely. And if I was being realistic, I'd say if you haven't started doing a podcast yet, it might be worth getting started before you talk to a podcast network. Because as you say, you got to have something.
That shout out wasn't for anyone just starting. Sorry about that. I didn't mean it that.
Didn't mean it as a criticism.
You gotta have something to offer, no matter what you do. You don't want to throw yourself out there and then get yourself buried, because it's like, like, well, here I am, but I got nothing to offer, so I'll just be here.
But at the same time, like this is something that I'm experiencing myself, which will be another really big piece of advice. Just this is turning into a podcast for podcasters. I'm sorry, but
this is the direction we've gone, and here we are.
Good.
This is what happens
when you are approaching a network like yours, like Blind Knowledge. The conversations that start happening can often get overwhelming if you haven't tackled a couple of things first. Like if you've got a great idea for a podcast, there's a niche for car owners who use an old version of CarPlay and hack their vehicles, for example.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yes, that will be a niche market. It's a small amount of people, but they're invested in the platform and, listening to podcasts in their car while they drive about how to fix their stereos and make CarPlay work with other devices, for example. It's a layup, right? All I need to do then is figure out how to record the audio, edit the audio, get it on a platform, pay some money to host the service. The list goes on and on and on and on. But eventually you land on monetization, advertising. How do I make this work for me? And how do I get paid for my time? And you think of a network and connecting with other people to try and blast that growth up. But if you haven't had a crack at the podcast yet, coming to that conversation with very little in terms of experience and stuff is, you might have a big enough following in other places that you can kind of leverage into something and just sidle into it. And if you're lucky enough to have a proclivity to technology and the podcasting world, then good on you. But it's really good to start doing it on your own first. Like me having the Lad Banter podcast that I was talking about earlier as an eventually failed podcast for different reasons than that. But, just dip your toe in the water, see what it's like, get a few episodes under your belt, iron out the kinks, and then approach a network like Blind Knowledge to see what you can foster in that relationship. And then it kind of can grow from there. And I'm seeing so many networks now. It's like, it's like when you find an ant.
They're following me, man. I should have started this 3 years ago when I thought of it, but now a lot of us, maybe they're not following me. Maybe I'm following them. I'm not sure, but
that's
I didn't notice anybody else when I started this. I was like, well, let's do it this way. And there's everyone has the same idea at the same spot, but it seems like there's little small things that are different from each one, or at least there has to be for survival. for competition wise. So we'll see how it
And
plays out.
that's the thing too. It doesn't necessarily have to be competition either, because there's so many that exist, but how many of them have died or finished? You never know.
Yeah, you
Um,
don't know. And I'm all about, not just straight up competition, but competition can be good. Like look at Coke and Pepsi. There is no Pepsi without Coke, and without Pepsi, it needs to be there almost. Like it would be
mhm.
weird without it. And yes, they're competitive, but they keep their prices kind of the same. They're
Yeah,
marketing the same kind of product. They need each other essentially. So there is kind of a working relationship almost. And I'm all
yeah,
about that. I'm all about working relationships, networking, cross promoting, even sharing talent, swapping it out and, working together within the industry to get things done and potentially boost both of us. I mean, that's the end goal. I'd rather
mm,
have it that way than be like, oh, well, screw you. We don't like you. We're going to be better than you. Blah, blah, blah. We're going to down talk you. It's just not my style. You get nowhere with that. I think, unless they're total scumbags. But, I haven't met anyone like that yet.
but
Yeah.
that's how I
So,
describe the podcasting community in general. The ones that
yeah,
get to hang
that's a good
around for
point.
a long time and connect with other podcasters. It's never people lashing out at others or being in direct competition with each other. We're all trying to boost ourselves up
Right.
because we
It's one big
understand
community.
what we're all going through. And a network can be a really good way of doing that. But just generally, people who are in podcasting for podcasting's sake, they're the ones who are going to be the most supportive and probably end up being the most successful. That's the stuff that you really want to see. But it's really interesting that it's like the ants at a picnic kind of thing. When you see one podcast network, you start seeing more, and look, it could be the social algorithm and trying to deliver me content that I've liked at least once on Twitter or something like that. But there are plenty out there that you could just have a look at, see what they offer and what they do, and they all seem to do something a little bit different. So it'll be worth entertaining for sure. Um, Talking about podcast networks generally, there's one that I stumbled on recently after hearing about it from someone who had co-hosted an episode with us on the Game and Watch podcast. They're called, what were they called? Fandom Limb. So fandom and LIMB, kind of like phantom limb syndrome. And apparently, their offering as a network is that you pay a little bit of money, you get the opportunity to run advertising on your podcast and cross promote with their other collaborating podcasts as well. And it's all focused around video games and nostalgia and kind of comic books and stuff. So it's really interesting the kind of networks you can find. But obviously, we want to stick with blind knowledge, right? Sorry, Joey. I think we're having some technical difficulties. Just can't hear you there. I can keep vamping. I love talking. So I've actually been kicking around an idea for anyone listening that would like to investigate a podcast for themselves. It's a podcast I'll be starting soon. It's kind of around video game news. I'm hoping it's going to be very interesting and kind of give me a little something extra that I can dedicate my time to as a podcaster and start to leverage some extra things for myself as well. It's going to be very short form. It's going to be video game news summarized and kind of interpreted for the audience. So if anyone listening is interested in video games, then I would urge you to eventually, once I get my act together, follow the Oracle's Dead Drop podcast. And in fact, this is an exclusive, Joey. You are the first to hear of this in any public arena. I know, right? Part of the journey. Um, Still can't hear you, Joey, but the Oracle's Dead Drop is hopefully going to be a very short form podcast. It's all right. This happens. It's all good. It's peek behind the curtain. Um, it's going to be short form, The idea is it's going to be quick, it's going to be snappy, it's going to be about giving you what you need to hear about the industry, so that you can go into conversations about video games with a little bit more knowledge behind you. And
Well,
the video
knowledge is a
game
great thing. Knowledge is a great thing.
knowledge is great. And more often than not, video game podcasts will try to grab an entire audience by giving the entirety of themselves for 2 to 4 hours a week. And not everyone has the time to dedicate to that. So the Oracle's Dead Drop, coming to wherever you get podcasts. Make sure you're following me at Matt Bliss Pod.
Check out Matt Bliss, guys. Check out Matt Bliss Pod on Twitter. And
yeah. And look, that's going to be the big piece of advice, just in case we need to wrap up in a second.
We might have to before my computer explodes. Yeah. There's things happening over here. I don't know what they're doing, but there's lights and sounds coming from places that shouldn't be there.
As long as you don't see smoke, then you're fine.
Yeah, Matt. Let's. So anyway, where can
last
people?
Piece of advice?
Yeah, please do. Yes, thank you.
It's really easy to have lots of ideas when you're getting started with a podcast. You feel like you can do 4 or 5 at a time. I've tried it. It's really hard. So if you're thinking about it, stick to one, put the power into it like I have with the Teaching CultureCast, and figure out the kinks, figure out what you need to get done, then start thinking about a couple more. Last piece of advice, though.
He is a teacher, folks. He is a teacher. You can tell. He does Teaching CultureCast. That is the name of the podcast, Teaching CultureCast. And you can see it. You can see it when you punch it into your phone or into your computer on Spotify, Apple, and everywhere else you listen to your favorite audio podcast.
And just as a last thing, we've also got the teachingculturecast.com, which is the home website where you can listen to episodes, find out a little bit more about me. And if you're a teacher that's keen to contribute to that community, you can get in touch with me there as well. Excellent.
Well, Matt, thank you so much for coming on. I had a great time. This is a great conversation. Everything is just, when it's live, my man. And that went, that went down a road I didn't think we'd even go down. But hey, here we are. We made it. We survived. And I hope I have you on again soon. This was fun, bro.
Yeah, man. Had a great time.
Appreciate you, man. Appreciate you. All right. I'm going to let you go, Matt. Have a good one, buddy. And that was Matt Bliss, everybody. Matt Bliss. He does Teaching CultureCast. Great guy, great beard, great things to say. Very knowledgeable, sir, I got to say, and a great time. So, in any doubt, before my whole system explodes, sparks are flying. There is some yellow flames. Anyway, I got to go. Next time, we're going to have someone on. I don't even know who's next. You just have to figure it out. Watch. We'll see what happens. There's like a fire over here. I gotta go. Peace.